So with that, let's get to a few questions, and we'll start out with some that were asked by the survey earlier this week. The first one was about I'm a solo show, and I have a hard time figuring out how to a get songs that work right in context of the content. I hope I explained that right. I was trying to read my own handwriting here, but is that how do I choose songs? Is it okay to choose songs that fit the content that I'm creating rather than playing the songs that are scheduled by the music director on the playlist? Well, okay, so this is, you're not going to like this answer, but no, that's not okay. Music directors and program directors spend a lot of time, hopefully, and a lot of energy and science in putting together a great playlist. And if you start going off the reservations and playing songs that you want to play because you think it fits whatever it is that you happen to be talking about, you're destroying all the science that goes into it. So don't do that. Now, there's other ways of using that content, though, as production elements to complement the conversation that you're having. So let's say you're doing a break that's about, I don't know, pick a topic. You can pick any topic that you want, and you've got a perfect song that fits that. Why not build that into the content instead of wanting to play that song after the content? You don't have to use the whole thing. Use it and produce your show the way a movie director or a television director produces a TV show or a movie script, where they use production to your advantage. I talked about that during the presentation when we were talking about music beds. So I am not a fan of letting the personalities choose songs. I think there is a time and a place for that in the right environment with the right personalities on the right stations. But by and large, it is usually a really bad idea. Question about, I've got a lot of activity on Facebook and a big social media presence, but I don't get very many phone calls. How can I convert the social media activity into phone calls? Well, and I also got another question about phone calls that says phone calls are harder than ever to get. Everybody wants to text or message in. What can I do? What are some tips that I can do to get more people calling my show? Okay, so I'm going to answer both of those at once, and I'm going to direct you to a couple of sources, and then I'll give you a couple of quick tips on that, because we could be here for an hour talking about how to get more phone calls. First of all, it's true. People are not calling radio stations nearly as much as they used to, and there are a lot of reasons for that. First of all, it's not as cool as it used to be. Second, when people call radio stations today, chances are nobody picks up the phone. It either goes to a voicemail or it rings endlessly or they get a busy signal. So over time, people have given up calling radio stations. They just don't call as much. Third is radio is not as popular as it used to be. Getting on that soapbox on the radio isn't as cool as it used to be. So there's not that urgency to get on and have something to say. Fourth, texting is a lot easier. Instant messaging is a lot easier. Communication is a lot easier than going through the phones, calling a DJ, getting someone to pick up, getting put on hold. It's a lot faster to instantly message. And that happens in your personal life too. So you do have all those things that are going up against you. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't get calls. The first thing is, and somebody just posted on the chat room that most stations aren't giving people good reasons to call. That's exactly what I was going to say. You've got to inspire people to call you. You've got to be provocative. You've got to be direct. You've got to be clear of what you want and who you want to call and when you want them to call you. And one of the reasons that people don't call is not only are they not getting good reasons to call, that you're not provoking a strong enough response to get them to participate, but you're not giving the phone number very well. I can't tell you how many stations I listen to where the personality rambles through the phone number and gives it as fast as they possibly can. And the listener can never remember that. They don't even hear it. They don't remember it. So you've got to give it at the right time. You've got to invite the audience. You've got to demonstrate that you're taking phone calls. Another barrier to getting phone calls is when when you read a lot of text messages or social media posts. You're communicating to the audience, and that's how we want you to talk back to us. It's backwards. If you want phone calls, put phone calls on. Now, the other thing is you don't need a lot of phone calls. You only need, I would rather have a few good phone calls that advance your content and your conversation than a lot of meaningless, useless phone calls. Of course, the more you get, the more you can use. I've got a ton of tips on this. I've got a whole seminar on it. It's called Fill the Phone Lines. And I've also got an ebook that's called Fill the Phone Lines that you can download from tjohnsonmediagroup.com. Go to tjohnsonmediagroup.com, do phone lines as a search, and you'll find that book. If you go to Insiders, you can watch the seminar on demand, Fill Your Phone Lines. And there's also an entire section about how to get more phone calls, how to treat phone calls right, how to reuse phone calls. Corey Dillon, a terrific solo personality here in San Diego, says that she uses listeners who call in for contests to bounce content and questions off of and get good audio engagement. Absolutely. That was in the seminar too about repurposing your callers. If they call for a contest, ask them a question. If they have no idea what you're talking about, just move on. But if they are good, use them. There are a lot of ways to get listeners to participate. The best way to get more activity on the phones is to demonstrate that it's not only okay and not only that they're invited, but it's fun to participate with your radio show. And you do that by demonstrating it by actually putting calls on. Next question was about segueing, tips for segueing into and out of breaks. So this gets more into techniques of coaching personalities, and this can be difficult for solo personalities, especially if you don't have coaching, because you tend to fall into habits and patterns. And there's a lot of different ways to get out of content and get out of and get into content as well. Really don't have time to go into all of those here. It's an individual and personal thing, but be creative with it. Don't fall into those habits and don't fall into those patterns. Some personalities use teases to end a break and drive activity toward your next appointment setting. Some will use production to get out of it. Some will give the phone number, and some are good with a laugh. It's very much individual for personalities. If you would like some tips on how to get into your content in breaks, I've got a post on my tjohnsonmediagroup.com website that is an ongoing list that I keep adding to of different ways to introduce songs. I started that, 3 or 4 years ago, and I have personalities who contributed to it on a regular basis. And it's really simple, but it's just changing the order of how you say things and how you get into things and get into it simply. The other thing is, don't overthink this, because the audience isn't listening nearly as much as you probably think that they are. The audience is not paying nearly as much attention as you think that they are. And so they don't hear the repetition. It might be very redundant for you, but it's not redundant or repetitious for the listener. Question about, I'm a host and I use my co-host for representing the female perspective, but I don't always get a very good response. It's usually hit or miss. What would you recommend? Well, the answer to most things is better prep. And this is kind of getting off the topic of a solo show and getting into team shows here. But I'll answer this quickly, and then we'll move on to some more solo show questions. If you're a team show and you're taking your co-host by surprise, hoping to get a spontaneous or natural response, and you're disappointed, then chances are that co-host isn't adequately prepared, and you're making it impossible for that co-host to perform to the best of her or his abilities. That's one of the weaknesses of team shows, by the way. And I talked about that at the beginning of the session, that a lot of times team shows will fall into this pattern of wanting to be spontaneous and be natural. And let's save it for the air. Let's not rehearse anything. We're always best when we don't know what's coming. Not usually. Seriously, every once in a while, you have an amazing moment that you can't replicate if you had prepped it. But most of the time, it's longer than it needs to be. It's sloppier than it needs to be. And as soon as the mics go off, you go, "Oh, I wish I'd thought of that. I wish I had said this." And it's not fair to your co-host to surprise them all the time, where you know where a break is going and you're hoping that they give you something and you surprise them with it. So chances are you need to prep that a little bit more deeply. Question, Lisa Berry. Great to hear from you, Lisa. Lisa says, regarding music beds, I voice track and I don't use a music bed live, but I do put music beds behind breaks to add color. Is that unwise? What are your parameters and best practices for using a music bed? I hate personalities using music beds just to have a music bed behind them. I mean, really, really hate it. And I've got a lot of reasons for hating it. The biggest reason is because it's a crutch. And this started a long time ago. At one point, program directors were telling personalities, we need you to have more energy on the air, but they didn't explain what more energy means. And so there ended up being this bag of tricks where, okay, I'm going to have more energy, so I'm going to talk faster, I'm going to talk louder, and I'm going to put a music bed behind me. Usually it's an upbeat, up-tempo dance track behind me. That doesn't give you energy, folks. Your words give your breaks energy. And a lot of times that music bed that's behind you is one of the reasons it's causing you to talk too fast, because you're trying to keep up with it. It's competing with attention for what you're saying. And so work on what you're saying, and you don't need a music bed. Now, there are times when a music bed is terrific and it works really well, but use it strategically as a tool to enhance the entertainment value of what it is that you're talking about. Use it to stage something. Use it to dramatize something. Use it as a sound effect, the way a producer would use sound effects or music in a sequence on a television show or a movie set. I think so many personalities have just started to have used music beds for so long. It's become such a crutch that when the music beds disappear, they freak out. They don't know. They sound different. They sound like they don't feel the same. Well, there's a way of getting off of them. And I would encourage every one of you that's using a music bed to experiment with this. Start bringing the levels down as you're performing. Bring it down 25%. So you can still hear it in your headphones. You've still got it as pace, but now you're not talking as loud or as fast to get over it. When you get comfortable with that, bring it down another 25%. Now you're half the level that it used to be. And it's a lot more comfortable for the listener. Maybe not more comfortable for you, but more comfortable for the listener. A week goes by, you've got it down 50%, take it down further. Take it down so it's just barely in the background. In fact, the listener probably can't even hear it unless they're really straining for it, but you can kind of still hear it for the pace in your headphones. And then take it away. Take it completely away and force yourself to not use music beds for a week. Get used to doing it a different way. And I'll tell you what you'll find. You'll find that your voice is a better weapon. You'll have more range. You'll have a more controlled conversational delivery. You will have more character in your voice. You will be able to pause and much more naturally without that music bed. Everything will get better. Everything about your presentation will get better when you lose the music beds, and only use music beds that enhance or are allowing you to transition from one thought to the next. I work with some personalities who use music, a different music bed that comes on every time they transition from one phone call to another. So they'll go to a phone topic, and as soon as they pick up the phone, they'll play a music bed behind it as a transition point to say, hey, here's something new that's happening. And then they fade that out after a few seconds. They go to another phone call, another music bed comes in. And they do it expertly. It sounds great, but it enhances the content. Don't use it to obscure the content. Now, that might fly in the face, and it might violate some of the rules that your program director has. Send them my way, and I'll have that discussion with them. But remember, I just think that so many personalities are over dependent on it. And especially solo personalities are over dependent on it. And sometimes it comes from a lack of confidence. Sometimes it's a lack of expertise. Sometimes it's just a crutch. It's because we've always done it this way. But work on doing it without that. And there's other reasons for it too. I'll tell you the most recent reason that I've heard from it is because especially younger demographics are completely rejecting overproduced audio. In the world of podcasts, you don't hear podcasts that are overproduced. A lot of them are just people who come on and talk. And if there's any production, it's very quick and it's a little bit of production. Television has moved in that direction. There's other podcasts that are highly produced, but they're produced to be dramatic. Kind of like I was talking about how radio shows should be using audio to produce their segments instead of just using a music bed. And as a result of that, society is changing. The way that we consume entertainment is changing, and listeners are rejecting overproduced content in audio, and especially on the radio. So I highly encourage you to move in that direction if you possibly can. Chuck Taylor, great. You're welcome to the shout outs. Well deserved. Chuck said that. Chuck's a member of my Audience Magnet course. And I mentioned at the beginning, before we started the presentation about Audience Magnet, a lot of the principles that I have in today's seminar go into more depth in Audience Magnet. It's an online video course for personalities. And you can find details of that at myaudiencemagnet.com. And Chuck also says a great resource for phones is Radio Peeps, phones private group on Facebook. It is. Go to Facebook and search groups and look for Radio Peeps. There's always a personality on there who's willing to be a caller onto your show. So great suggestion. Mike Pesto says, I have my wife call in to comment on show topics once or twice a week. Is that something I should continue doing, or should I just reference her and convey her dialogue? I don't know. I don't know what your wife sounds like, and I don't know what your relationship is with the audience, or if she's a regular character on the air or not. I mean, there are some cases where I've heard personalities who've used that very effectively, and there's some cases where it comes off as being inside and self-indulgent, and it would be better not to use your wife as a caller. By the way, when I was programming a station here in San Diego for many years, I had an assistant in our department who had a great voice, and it was like an everyday voice, and she was on the air as a different caller almost every day. She would be Lisa from Santee one day, and she would be Jennifer from Poway the next day. But she would, whatever the personality needed, she would be that caller. So find somebody who really sounds good like that and assign them a different character role and play that role. It's a great way to use that. But whether you should use your wife or not, I mean, maybe, once or twice a week. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. There are way too many variables. If she is a good character, if she becomes a great character, then it's probably a really good idea. And if she's just, kind of there, but doesn't really add a whole lot to the break, just having your wife on, it may tell people that you're married, but does she bring something to the content that you can't do by yourself? That also depends on how you use it. So it's really, really difficult to answer that question. Private question came in. What do you think about pre-recording games with listeners over Zoom or other technology? This could be a way for a solo show to sound more active and execute a break that previously only morning show teams could do. Thoughts on this? I love that idea. And I've got some shows that are doing it regularly. I've got a lot of shows who are doing all of their interviews by Zoom now. Because, if you do interviews or guest appearances on a show and you're doing it by phone where you don't see each other, there's a loss of intimacy there that making eye contact brings. And you can bring more out when you are doing it via Zoom. And I think there's a lot of potential of doing that with listeners as well. So, I think pre-recording, voice tracking. I didn't get into this, and I'm going to do a seminar one of these days on voice tracking, because I think voice tracking gets a bad name because of what voice tracking has become. Voice tracking has become a way for companies to get a personality to add their talent to a dozen radio stations, rather than a piece of technology that allows you to be more effective and sound better. And if you use the technology, whether it's Zoom or voice tracking or whatever, pre-recording your segments, I've got some shows who do daily segments like Are You Smarter Than, the personality, or $1,000 Minute. There's a couple others that have a lot of moving parts to it. And pre-recording those takes a lot of pressure off, allows you to clean it up. It allows you to keep it tighter. It allows you to make the listener, the contestant, sound better. So absolutely do those games over Zoom. I think the listener loves to see you, and it creates a video that you can put up on your website later. And it's really terrific quality. So I would absolutely use that. Use all those tools that are at your disposal. I think we need to use technology and voice tracking more to our advantage than we are in most cases.